This is Tar Heel Talk, an in-depth look at the issues and people making news in North Carolina. Here's your host, Sonia Williams.
High school grads are ready to fly the nest this fall, but there are a couple more classes they need before they can take flight. And local financial professional Alex Sutherland from Life Plan Group is here to help us with some money lessons for your scholars. Alex, welcome back to Tar Heel Talk.
Thanks for having me.
Now, moving into college is an exciting time, not just for students, but for their parents as well. But there's some conversations that need to happen before that happens, and that is, a lot of it centers around finances. Why is it so important to talk about finances when it comes to college?
You know, going to college is maybe a little bit more fun in the experiences you have versus talking about the financial part, but it is really important because college isn't free. It's very expensive, and it's important for the parents and the students to understand what they're getting themselves into from a financial perspective so that when students do graduate, they're off to a good financial start.
And that's important because a lot of times students will graduate with that debt from student loans.
Yeah, and the class of 2017 had on average over $39,000 in student loans. So it's really important to understand the cost of college and the loans, not only up front, but then what does that mean long term for financial planning and making sure that when you get out of college, you're off to the right start and you have a plan to pay back those loans.
Right, and you have some really good tips that we want to kind of talk about.
Yes.
And I know that the first one, we're talking about, you know, what types of money lessons we should be covering. The first lesson is the budget. It's important to develop a budget and stick to it.
It is, and that can be really challenging for a student going off for the first time to college. They maybe haven't had a thought about budgeting. So it's really important for parents to have that conversation with their children to say, okay, here's the expectations for how to deal with money. And it's not just about tuition, room and board, living expenses, you know, how frequently is the child going to be going out to eat, and those types of things. And I think when the parents have those conversations with the children, it starts to develop really good habits because then when they get their own job out of college, they can start to be thinking about budgeting more and more as they go forward.
Right, and I think too, having that budget kind of holds them accountable because when you're in high school, you're just spending mom and dad's money a lot of times, not all the time. Some kids have jobs, but it's important that they actually see where the money is going.
Yeah, and a lot of students will have either summer jobs or part-time jobs during college. And so maybe, now whether they worked or not in high school, but maybe for the first time they're starting to get some form of income and building a budget, sticking to it, making sure that they are disciplined is a really good habit to have because once you are in full-time employment and you have those paychecks coming in, the longer you go without building that discipline, it can be harder to get.
Right. So when you talk about having those conversations about finances, I know a lot of times parents want to plan for college early, and so they start saving for college when their kids are little. What is your advice on how to do that?
You know, it's really a balance. Parents have to think about three main things when college is in the back of the mind. One is saving for their own retirement, and college expenses can certainly take away from that. The other is paying the bills now. You know, parents have current expenses that they have to deal with. And then that third is preparing for college. And one of the suggestions I always give is make sure you have a balanced approach. You know, you shouldn't be allocating all your resources in one area or the other. It should be balanced to achieve the goals that you want. And that might take some planning and thinking through and having conversations with your child or with your spouse or even with a financial professional.
Excellent advice. Another lesson is around credit.
Yeah.
That's a big one.
And sometimes we think credit can be very scary or something we want to avoid, and that's not necessarily true. Building credit is really important to become a responsible adult. You know, you need to have a good credit when it comes to buying a car, buying a home, and so it's really important for students to get off on the right foot with understanding on how credit works. A lot of times a client will ask me, should I have a credit card for my child? You know, should they have one in college? And I'm not opposed to that. That can be a really good thing because it starts building the credit. And a lot of times, credit agencies look for the length of time that you have that credit card open. The only suggestion I'd make is making sure you have a conversation with your child on what is a credit card, how does it operate, and paying that off monthly. Whether that's the student through work or the parent or however that arrangement works, it's important to build that credit responsibly.
Right, and I think too, with some of the lending laws changing, it's much more difficult for a college student to get a credit card. They were practically giving them away when I was in college, which could have been quite dangerous. But now that those lending laws have changed, that has, I think, helped college students manage better.
And you know, as a parent, you should be looking into what are the terms of the credit card, and you want something really basic to start at first. You know, a lot of times parents will have different credit cards with various perks or cash back or a lot of features, and kids might not be able to get that at this point in time, but making sure you understand the basic features, what are the interest rates, what are the repayments, and allowing yourself not to get in over the head. One of the things I also recommend is for particular credit cards is you can set limits. And so it might be nice to set a lower limit to making sure that the child is not spending beyond their means.
Right, and I'd like one of the tips where you're saying a credit card is for purchases, not for a lifestyle. So.
That's exactly right. And so you can use that to an advantage to start building credit and learning how to use it responsibly. And there's no better time to start than while you're getting your independence in college and then going to your first job.
Absolutely. And another lesson deals with loans, and that's something that a lot of college students will face.
Right. You know, college costs are getting more and more expensive, and taking out loans is more and more common. So it's really important to think through what are the terms of the loans, what's going to be the repayment plan, and making sure you're aware and your child is aware of the responsibility of taking out loans and having in the back of your mind, how are we going to repay those when it comes time to start that. And usually that's upon graduation. The first bills of those loans are due. One of the suggestions I often make is when parents are having a conversation with their child about loans and what they want to do as far as a degree and an employment, is start thinking about what's the starting salaries of your profession when you get out of college, and compare those salaries and the monthly amount you might get for income to what that repayment is on the loan, and make sure those are in sync.
Well, we're going to take a break. We'll talk more in just a minute.
Yeah.
We'll be back with more on paying for college after these messages. Today's show focuses on planning and paying for college, and with us again is financial professional Alex Sutherland from the Life Plan Group. Now, Alex, before the break, we were talking a little bit about student loans and how important it is to understand all the terms. Talk a little bit about the different types of student loans and what people should be looking for.
Sure. Well, there's, of course, federal government student loans, and there's also private loans that you can get. And when you're comparing different types of loans, it's important to understand the fine print. So what is the repayment schedule? How is the interest being accrued? And when does the repayments have to start? And there even are some federal loan programs where there's some forgiveness in your student loans based on the type of work that you do after college. And so understanding all of that from the upfront is really important, because once you get into a loan, then you've got to follow the terms, and you don't want to make a mistake and be unable to pay that back in a timely fashion.
Right. And there are websites where families can go and kind of get some guidance on those.
Yes, of course, the FAFSA website from the government is very helpful and can provide a lot of good information. Collegescholarships.org is another good resource. And there's also, if there's a particular college that your student is looking at going to, there's a lot of good resources on their websites where you can go there and ask about loans, and they can point you in the right direction as well.
Okay. Now, when you talk about what people should know when they are considering taking out a student loan. The
Right.
first thing is that they need to calculate the cost of college, which
Yeah.
can be overwhelming when you do that.
It can be. And so you got to think about in-state tuition, community college tuition, out-of-state tuition, and then be mindful, you got to add on top of that room and board,
Right.
and then living expenses. And so when you add up all of that, then include some books and all sorts of other stuff, it can get really expensive. And so knowing that up front might help a parent and a student have a conversation to say, you know, here's our financial budget, here's the options available, and help them make a good decision. I had a client telling me about their conversation they had with their daughter, and the plan was to go to community college for 2 years and then go to a 4-year institution to get a degree because it would be a lot more affordable for the family.
Right, right. That's happening a lot
It is.
more because of financial reasons.
Yeah, and it's a good path. There's a lot of great community colleges, and in our local area, there's a lot of great universities as well, and so there's good resources out there to help make it affordable. And it doesn't hurt to talk to a financial professional about this. It can be complicated and daunting. This is a big expense for families, and so talking that through and understanding the different options can be really important to do.
Okay. And another tip is to estimate your monthly payment. That's so you understand exactly what your financial obligation is going to be.
You know, sometimes we have this big number for a college loan, and I mentioned earlier that the average debt for that class of 2017 was almost $40,000, and that can feel conceptual in nature. And when we boil it down to say, okay, here's going to be your monthly payment when you graduate, it makes it a little bit more real. And then it can have a better conversation with the parents and the students to say, okay, when you do get your first job and you do have this first your paycheck, how much of that's going to go to the loan? And that's important to know.
Right. And I know a lot of times students will take out a loan, but their parents will as well to help finance college. But then, like you were saying, that's kind of dipping into their retirement as well.
It can be challenging. A lot of parents will ask me, you know, should I use my retirement resources or the savings I'm doing for retirement and direct those to college costs? And there's pros and cons to that. You know, one of the challenges from a parent's perspective is they don't want to jeopardize their own financial future, but certainly they want to be supportive to their child and making sure they're starting off on the right track. So that's a balance. And another reason why it's important to think that through and ask some questions with someone who specializes in retirement and college planning so that they have confidence, the parents, that they're on the right track and they're not jeopardizing their own financial future.
That's good advice. And the third one is know your repayment options.
Yeah.
Because
yeah.
the day is coming where you have to repay.
A lot of times student loans will give you a 4-year window and upon graduation. Well, sometimes if it takes longer than 4 years to graduate, you might run into some issues. Some will allow you to defer that until you get graduation. So there's a lot of different terms in student loans that's important to know ahead of time because it's hard to chart out a student's path and know for certainty how long they're going to take, if they're going to graduate, if they're going to take a year off. All of those various things are happening, and so it's just good to know the flexibility and the options any particular loan has before you commit to it.
Okay. When you look at the bigger picture of, you know, getting a college education so that you can get a decent job, why is it so important for students to plan and pay for college?
And you know, college and paying for it's another form of investment. You're investing in yourself and you're investing in your power to earn more income. And while it's not for everyone, it's important to think through college and what's your career path and goals. You know, sometimes the challenge is just coming out of high school, students may not know what that is, and so as a parent you have to talk through that with them and understand the different paths. But I think what's most important is that the student and the parent understand what's the earning potential with this investment. Just like anything else, you know, you don't want to throw money away. You want to use it and use it well. And so understanding the career path that's possible from this education is really empowering and important.
And so definitely something that I think families are starting to plan earlier and earlier, especially if they have more than one child.
Absolutely. Seems like going and traveling to the different colleges and visiting campuses is happening early and earlier in high school and making those decisions. And there's a lot of things that play into that. You know, the cost, the location, the type of education. And so the more research you do, and even college, calling colleges, visiting colleges is always really important.
Absolutely. How can families find out more information and get some guidance and support to help them as they navigate paying for college?
Yeah, and I think there's two major places they can go. One is talk to a financial professional that specializes in college planning. And that's really important because the loans can be complex. And even having just a sit-down meeting with them and going over the basics of that can be very empowering and helpful. And that's one of the things we do with our clients, particularly those that have children getting ready for college, is to say, okay, here are some of the options and things to be mindful of. The other is to go to some of the websites we mentioned earlier, the FAFSA, the college scholarships, and making sure that you access those and read a bunch of different research on those. And then another good option is if there's a particular college in mind, go to their website and contact them directly. There's always great resources that colleges can provide on this.
Right. Lots of options out there and lots of support.
That's right.
All right, we're going to take another break. We'll talk more in just a minute.
Sure.
Don't go away. Tar Heel Talk will continue after these messages. Welcome back to Tar Heel Talk. I'm Sonia Williams. We're talking today about planning and paying for college. And with us again to give us some guidance is financial professional Alex Sutherland from Life Plan Group. Now, Alex, how can college students get ahead and start planning out their finances and planning for their future?
Yeah, we've talked about the cost of college and the expense and paying that down, and then there's another element of it, and that's saving for the future for them, and that can be challenging, but as the saying goes, it's always better to start early. And so a good habit to start with your college child is saving, and particularly if they're able to work part-time in college or over the summer, is putting some of that money away and build the habit of saving, because once the full paycheck comes, then it might be more tempting to spend it all, when in reality we know that saving part of that is going to be really important to set them up well for their long-term financial plan.
Okay. And what can we as parents do to help support our students as they plan for the future?
Yeah, there's a couple things that parents can do. One is you can start a Roth account for your child, and they can contribute up to $5,500 into that account, and that would be a good way to start for the child, particularly if the child is working. And that type of account, it grows tax-free, so it's a great thing for a child. And
so
it's
that's
something
$5,500
a year.
per year.
Yeah,
okay.
Yeah, per year. And that's something that, and you can contribute any amount, but that's the maximum that the IRS allows. And that allows them to start the habit of saving and get into that beneficial habit for long-term success.
What other ways, I know that a lot of families can get creative when it comes to planning and trying to pay for college. What are some other ways that you're seeing your clients manage that balance?
Right. There are also 529 plans, and that's a specific investment that's for higher education costs. And so parents and or grandparents can contribute to those plans, and money comes out of that tax-free as long as it goes towards paying for what's called qualified education expenses, college. And what's interesting about those plans is that in a recent tax reform act that was passed, is those monies can now also be used for private education for high school or either elementary for students as well. So that's a great way that parents or even grandparents can be supportive financially to children and helping them in their education.
And what is the name of that plan?
It's a 529 plan.
529, okay.
Yep, and North Carolina has a great 529 plan, and people can go to their site and Google that and read about that option as well.
Now, for those of us who did not plan ahead and you have a child about to enter college, where should they start when it comes to trying to pay for?
I think the first step
education.
is to sit down and look at the different options. And what I mean by that is when we talked about community college, in-state, out-of-state, and start seeing what are the costs. And we know that college can be expensive, but actually taking some time and figuring out what tuition actually is for some different options can be really empowering. And then start to work at the budget and saying, how is this going to fit? And I think that's where a financial professional can be really helpful and valuable, is to say, okay, here's your goals as far as paying for college, and here's where you're at, and here's a path forward. And that's what most people want when they come and they meet and talk with us, is they want to know that they have a plan and a path and a path forward.
And I want to go back to student loans. We were talking a little bit about the different student loans,
Right.
But it's important that, like you were saying, that families know and read the fine print and understand the terms of the loan. Talk a
Right.
little bit more about some of those different options that are available, and maybe some things that might be red flags for families.
Yeah, of course, one of the things to pay attention to is interest rates. Now, there's going to be different interest rates, whether it's a federal loan, a private loan, so understanding those costs. Some loans have different qualifications. If there's different financial impacts for your family, you might be qualified for a loan or not. And then throw into that mix is there's also a lot of merit-based loans or scholarships that are important for families to look into, particularly if a child has a good academic record or they plan to go into a sports or some other activity in college. There might be some creative things that colleges offer to really help pay that bill. So it's important to do your research and to talk to someone who knows about these things so that you can better have a plan and understand them more in depth.
Right. And when you're talking about budgeting, talk a little bit about the importance of families working together and making sure that the student truly understands how to put together a budget so that they can be successful in college.
It can be challenging for parents to once figure out to be on the same page themselves, but then communicate that with a child, because going from high school into college, a lot of times budget is not on the top of mind for a student. It's a lot of other things, and so having that conversation might not be the most pleasant, but it has to be really important for both sides, because when there's a mutual expectation, then there's a lot more success. When a student thinks they can spend one thing and a parent thinks another thing, that's when there can be some more challenging. So talking through the budget with a student and setting those parameters, I think, is extremely important from the get-go. And then that student understands that they have to, as you mentioned earlier, live within those means. And that's just a great habit to have.
Right. And getting a credit card is not necessarily a bad thing.
It's not necessarily a bad thing as long as it's done responsibly. And I think understanding the fine print of that and paying it off every month is a great way to build credit. So when the young professional wants to buy their first car, their first home, they're set up really well to do so.
Right, and that's important. Like you were saying, that credit history, that length of time is important.
Yeah, the credit agencies look at the length of time, and so starting earlier on that, it can be very advantageous for the child. And of course, you want to be able to pay that off, though. You don't want to rack up the credit card debt, because that will be dangerous quickly.
Absolutely. We have about a minute left in the program. Any final advice for families as they think about paying for college?
I think the first step is to take a big breath, relax a little, and spend some time doing some research. It's such an important decision that you don't want to make a spur-of-the-moment decision on that. You want to know the short-term and long-term consequences, and don't be afraid to ask for help. There's a lot of great resources out there. There's a lot of financial professionals that work for college planning and can help people. Our firm does that, and there's a lot of good resources online that can help steer you in the right direction.
So definitely lots of options and
That's
support for families making this huge decision.
It is, yep.
All right. Alex Sutherland with the Life Plan Group. Thank you. It's always a pleasure having you on. Thank you so
bet.
much for being our guest today.
Yeah.
All right. That's it for this week's Tar Heel Talk. To comment on this or other episodes of the show, like us on Facebook, follow us on Instagram, or send us an email to tarheeltalk@fox50.com. I'm Sonia Williams. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you again next week.